Welcome everyone to Epsilon J, where today I am going to be talking about whether water is wet. It's something that a lot of people have asked about recently, and I've heard a lot of debate about it, and so I figured I'd give my take on it with science. So, what we need to think about is how we can determine whether something is wet. Some things to think about is there an alternative to it being wet? Could you have dry water? Because if you think about something like paint, you can have wet paint and dry paint, and what we're essentially trying to figure out is it the same with water? Can you have wet water and dry water? So, before someone asks about this, dry ice is not water. Dry ice is carbon dioxide that's frozen into a solid state. But that does bring up the question of ice. Is ice dry water? Because if there is such a thing as dry water, then there is such a thing as wet water, meaning that water in the liquid state would be wet. Ice, in fact, is not fully dry. Ice is actually partially liquid as well. This is because ice is not completely frozen. Some of the molecules still remain in liquid state when it's frozen into a solid form. That's why ice is slippery. So, does this mean that water is not wet? Well, there would eventually be a point where water would get cold enough where it would become something called a Bose-Einstein condensate. A Bose-Einstein condensate is a state of matter like solid, liquid, gas, plasma, colloid, and all the other states of matter that they have discovered, that I'm not going to list here because there are a lot of them. The property of a Bose-Einstein condensate that makes it different from a solid is that all particles act like one single particle. Because of this, if water became a Bose-Einstein condensate, it would definitely be in solid form, but none of its molecules could go to a liquid state because of the single wave function, the function determining the properties of a particle, would stay the same for all particles of the water. In that case, it would be pretty safe to say that as long as it was kept in the cold conditions for it to stay as a Bose-Einstein condensate, it would be dry, which means that in every other state of matter, water is wet, at least the states of matter that we commonly see. Because there can be dry water, there can also be wet water. And that wet water happens to be the liquid water and ice that we think of when we're having this debate. That's my opinion, but here's how I've heard people talking about this. I've heard people just screaming their opinion at each other. It's wet, no it's not. And that isn't really the right way of arguing or debating a point. It's not about who can yell the loudest. And in our culture today, a lot of it has become about who can yell the loudest. But you need to use facts and reasoning to support your opinion, not just yelling loudly. And I believe that is a problem that is facing us today. Because if arguing is only about yelling, then someone could yell something completely unfactual, and as long as they can yell it loud enough, people will believe them. No, that's not the way things work. Much of this is probably due to attention span shortening, which I might actually make another video on. It is an entire problem in itself, but here's a summary. People want things to be told to them quickly, not explained in long, detailed explanations, unless those detailed explanations are done in the right way. This is because of an entire series of other things that have been affecting each other for years in society, which I might talk about in another video. But if someone's attention span is shortened, they want something explained quickly. And that is how arguing and debating has become about who can yell the loudest. The question of whether water is wet isn't all that important, but I'd like to hear why people think it's wet or not wet, even though I think that it is wet. Okay, this is just something to think about, but I hope I got all of you watching this thinking about something, and whether you agree with me or not.
Thank you for watching.